My name is Joyce Schmidt, and I was 28 when my world split open like glass shattering on marble. At the time, I thought I was standing at the edge of something beautiful, a future I had carefully built brick by brick only to watch it collapse in a single whisper. I had a good life, at least on paper. I worked as a marketing manager at a mid-sized firm in the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. My coworkers often joked that I was the responsible one, the planner, the one who kept everything from falling apart. And maybe that was true. I liked knowing I could depend on myself. I liked being steady. And then there was Christopher. We'd been together for 4 years, and to me, he was the missing piece I didn't even know I was searching for. He was everything I wasn't: spontaneous, free-spirited. A yoga instructor who always talked about flow and living in the moment. He had this energy about him that drew people in, like sunlight spilling into a dark room. I thought that was balance. He thought I was his anchor. At least that's what I believed. I poured myself into our relationship. I helped him pay rent when his classes didn't bring enough income. I picked up groceries, cooked late dinners, and sat cross-legged on the couch listening to his endless philosophies about energy and the universe. When he wanted to attend week-long yoga immersions in the mountains, I rearranged my work trips, handed him my credit card for gas, and told him to go find himself. The truth, I thought, that if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, loved enough, it would be reciprocated. By our 4th year, I felt certain about him. We'd had our late-night talks about marriage, about maybe one day having kids. He'd rest his head on my lap, trace circles on my arm, and whisper, "I can't wait to grow old with you." I'd smile, clutching those words like promises. So I began planning a proposal. I know what you're thinking. It's not traditional for the woman to propose. But I've never been one to cling to tradition for the sake of it. I wanted him to know that I was sure, that I wasn't waiting around, that I chose him fully. I picked the place carefully, our favorite Italian restaurant downtown, the one with dim lighting, a little live jazz in the corner, and the best tiramisu in the city. I reserved the same corner booth we always loved, the one where he'd once leaned across the table to kiss me in the middle of dessert. The ring I bought was simple, understated, a single diamond on a slender white gold band. I had worked extra freelance hours quietly, so I wouldn't touch our joint savings. Every detail was meant to reflect us steady but meaningful. The night of the proposal, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. But it was the good kind of nerves, the kind that felt electric with anticipation. Christopher showed up looking like the version of him I fell in love with. Soft shirt, tousled hair, that easy grin. Dinner flowed naturally at first. He talked about his classes, about a new woman who had joined the advanced session. "She's incredible," he said. "She just gets it, you know. Her flow is so natural." I smiled, thinking nothing of it. Christopher often raved about his students. As dessert approached, my heart pounded harder. The ring box pressed against my thigh through my pocket. The jazz hummed softly. I reached down, fingers brushing the velvet. That's when it happened. Christopher's eyes flicked down, catching the shape of the box beneath the tablecloth. His face froze, not in joy, not in shock, in dread. He grabbed my hand hard under the table. His nails dug into my skin. He leaned in close, his voice low and sharp, dripping with disgust. "God, Joyce, please don't. You're embarrassing both of us." For a moment, I couldn't process the words. My ears rang. My chest tightened. What I whispered back. He shook his head, eyes darting around the restaurant as if a spotlight was on us. "Put it away. We're not that. Not now. Maybe not ever." The ring box suddenly weighed 100 pounds in my palm. The jazz turned to static. The waiter appeared with tiramisu, oblivious, and I forced a smile, sliding the box back into my pocket like I was hiding contraband. We ate in silence. Christopher pretended everything was fine, laughing a little too loudly when the waiter checked on us. I tasted nothing. My stomach was a knot of humiliation and confusion. On the drive home, the silence was suffocating. The radio filled the air, but not the space between us. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, while Christopher stared out the window as if he were already somewhere else. Back at the apartment, I finally broke. "Christopher," I said, tossing my keys on the counter, "what the hell was that? We've talked about marriage, about our future, about us." He sighed, dropped his bag on the couch, and avoided my eyes. "Joyce, things change. You're great, you are, but I've been feeling trapped lately." "Trapped," I repeated, my voice barely steady. "You're safe, predictable," he said, as if those words were flaws. "I need more flow in my life, more passion, more spontaneity, and," He hesitated, finally meeting my gaze with something almost pitying. I've been talking to someone from class. It's nothing physical yet, but she gets me. She understands my energy. You don't. I felt the air leave my lungs. My mind flashed through every dinner I'd cooked, every rent check I'd covered, every sacrifice I had made so he could find himself. How long? I asked quietly. A couple months, he admitted, shrugging like it was nothing. It just happened. We connect. She makes me feel alive. You're stable, Joyce. But stability isn't excitement. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the ring box at him. I didn't even cry. I stood there still as stone while something inside me cracked. Then we're done, I said. He blinked, clearly surprised that I didn't beg. Just like that. Just like that, I repeated. That night, he slept on the couch. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, the ring box mocking me from the nightstand. I felt like I had built a house on sand, only to watch it crumble with one wave. By morning, Christopher was up early packing a bag. I brewed coffee, handed him a mug without a word. He took it, sipping awkwardly, then muttered, "Joyce, it doesn't have to be messy. We can still talk, maybe even stay friends." I leaned against the counter, meeting his eyes at last. My voice was calm, but it carried steel. "No, Christopher. Clean break." He frowned, frustration flashing across his face. "You'll regret letting me go so easily. People like me don't come around often." I didn't answer. I just watched him zip up his bag, call for a ride, and leave. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty apartment. I stood there for a long time, coffee cooling in my hand, wondering how 4 years of devotion could vanish so quickly, wondering how love could turn into shame in a single night. But I didn't chase him. I didn't beg. I didn't crumble in front of him. If Christopher wanted flow, chaos, passion, he could have it. All I felt was the silence, heavy, endless, and for the first time terrifyingly empty. The morning after Christopher walked out, the apartment felt too big. It wasn't a mansion, just a modest one-bedroom with creaky wooden floors and thin walls that carried the sounds of neighbors' TVs. But suddenly, every corner seemed hollow. The living room where we used to collapse after long days. The kitchen where I'd cooked meals listening to Christopher's endless monologues about energy alignment. The bed where I thought we'd share a future. Now it was all just furniture. His absence didn't hit like an explosion. It was quieter than that, more like a slow leak in a tire hissing until you realize you can't drive anywhere anymore. I sat at the table that first morning, with a mug of coffee, staring at the steam until it faded. My phone buzzed with work emails, and I ignored them. I scrolled through our old photos once, then deleted them all. Not out of anger, just necessity. It wasn't until I opened the drawer and saw the ring box that the humiliation washed over me again. Velvet against my fingertips. I thought of his words at the restaurant, "You're embarrassing both of us." I closed the drawer hard. For days, I moved on autopilot. Work, home, sleep, repeat. My coworkers noticed the change but didn't pry. I was grateful. The last thing I needed was sympathy that cracked me open in the middle of the office. At night, though, the silence was unbearable. I'd reach for my phone, half expecting Christopher's goodnight texts. Then remember. My body betrayed me, aching for routine, for something that no longer existed. I didn't cry much. That surprised me. It wasn't that I was strong. It was that the shock had frozen everything. Instead of sobs, there was a kind of numb buzzing in my head. I found myself replaying memories with a sharper lens. The nights I'd cooked dinner while he stayed late at the studio. The weekends I'd given up to support his retreats. The way I'd rearranged my life so he could chase his passions without ever questioning if he'd do the same for me. It all felt like a ledger, now my sacrifices stacked on one side, his betrayals on the other. The math didn't add up. One afternoon, I walked to the park near our apartment. It was a chilly day, wind threading through the trees, scattering leaves across the path. I sat on a bench, notebook in hand. I wasn't dramatic about it, not dear diary entries, just bullet points. What went wrong? What did I ignore? He said he felt trapped. He called me predictable. He was talking to someone else for months. I sacrificed stability for his chaos. The list made my stomach twist, but it was grounding. Better than replaying his face over and over. Later that week, I took the ring back to the jeweler. The clerk gave me a sympathetic smile, asked no questions, just counted out the refund. I deposited the money straight into my savings account. Practical, not sentimental. That night, I changed the locks on the apartment. I told myself it was for safety, but really it was ritual, a way of saying you don't live here anymore. Mutual friends started reaching out. Texts buzzed in. "Hey, Joyce, heard about you and Christopher. You okay?" I kept my responses short. Yeah, I'm moving on. Thanks for checking. I didn't want to be the gossip centerpiece. I knew how people whispered how breakups became entertainment. The truth was, I wasn't okay. But I wasn't about to hand Christopher the satisfaction of seeing me unravel, even indirectly. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, the emptiness pressing down like a weight. Sometimes I left the TV on just to drown out the silence. Other times I sat at the window with tea, watching strangers walk their dogs, envying their ordinary lives. That envy surprised me. I didn't crave passion or chaos like Christopher did. I craved normal, stability, a partner who didn't treat loyalty as suffocating. The unfairness burned deepest when I remembered the little things, like the weekend getaway I had planned, flights booked, hotel reserved, that Christopher canceled last minute for a yoga workshop. I had thought I was being supportive. Now I wondered if he had already been texting her during that time, telling her how stagnant he felt with me. I clenched my fists so tight my nails left crescents in my palms. But instead of rage, a strange calm followed, a clarity. He had chosen chaos. I couldn't change that. I made a promise to myself that night I wouldn't chase him. Not once. No begging texts. No, please explain. If he thought I was boring, predictable, then fine. Let my silence be louder than any scream. Still, loneliness lingered like smoke after a fire. I'd catch myself setting 2 plates at dinner before remembering, or reaching across the bed in half sleep only to find cold sheets. One evening, I ran into a mutual acquaintance at the grocery store. She gave me that tilted head look, the one laced with pity. Heard Christopher's really glowing these days, she said brightly. New woman, new energy. He says he's finally free. The words sliced, but I forced a smile. Good for him. I walked away my cart, rattling against the floor tiles, anger simmering beneath my skin. Glowing free. Was I the prison he had to escape? That night I sat down with my journal again, this time writing not bullet points, but a single line: I refused to be his ghost. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, laced up my running shoes, and jogged through the park. My lungs burned, my legs ached. But for the first time since the breakup, I felt alive in my own skin. I wasn't healed, not even close, but I was surviving, quietly, stubbornly. And somewhere deep down beneath the wreckage, I felt the faintest ember of defiance flicker to life. Because if Christopher thought I was predictable, safe, boring, then he hadn't seen what I was capable of when I stopped carrying his weight. Grief doesn't arrive like a thunderstorm. Sometimes it seeps in like fog, blurring everything, until you can't tell where the ground ends and the sky begins. For weeks, I moved through life like a shadow. Work was my anchor. I poured myself into campaigns, staying late at the office, volunteering for projects no one else wanted. Numbers and deadlines couldn't betray me. They obeyed rules. They made sense. My boss noticed. A month after Christopher left, I was called into her office. She leaned back in her chair, smiling. Joyce, your last pitch blew the clients away. We're promoting you to senior manager. I thanked her, smiled politely, then walked back to my desk and sat down in silence. Inside, I felt nothing. The kind of numbness where good news doesn't sink in because your heart is still buried under rubble. That night, though, as I typed the promotion email to my parents, a small ember stirred. Maybe I wasn't the boring one. Maybe I was building something steady while Christopher chased illusions. Still, the nights remained brutal. I'd cook dinner for one, eat in silence, then sit at the window, phone in hand, resisting the urge to check if he'd posted anything. I didn't. I refused. But the temptation was always there. Finally, I decided to try therapy. I found a quiet little office 3 blocks from my apartment. The therapist, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, asked me to tell her everything. So I did the proposal, the humiliation, the predictable insult, the other woman. When I finished, she sat back thoughtful. Joyce, you gave him stability, loyalty, sacrifices. But who was giving that back to you? The question cracked something open. I'd been so focused on what I wasn't exciting, chaotic, passionate, that I hadn't asked what I deserved. From then on, our sessions became a mirror. Each week, I peeled back layers of habits I didn't even realize I had, the way I overcompensated, the way I equated sacrifice with love. I walked out lighter, though sometimes raw, like a wound finally exposed to air. I started small routines that were just mine. Early morning runs, evening journaling, reading books I'd abandoned years ago. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always wanted, but never had time for because Christopher's schedule took priority. The first time I lifted the camera to capture the city skyline at dawn, the lens fogged with my breath. But as I adjusted the focus, something inside me adjusted too. The city wasn't broken. It was alive, layered, imperfect, just like me. And then slowly the outside world crept back in. One Friday evening, my coworker dragged me to a happy hour. I almost declined. Exhaustion had become my default excuse, but she insisted. Joyce, you need to laugh again. Come on. That's where I met Timothy. He wasn't dazzling like Christopher, not in the spotlight chasing way. He was a graphic designer on our team, though I'd never worked closely with him. Warm smile, sharp wit, the kind of man who noticed details without making a show of it. He asked me about the book I was reading instead of my relationship status. We talked art travel, our favorite local cafes. Easy, unforced. For the first time in months, I laughed, really laughed, the kind that bubbles up without permission. It wasn't a date, not yet, but it felt like stepping into sunlight after months of rain. Over the next few weeks, we crossed paths more often. Coffee in the break room, a shared cab after late nights at the office. I learned he loved photography too. He showed me snapshots of hidden alleys and rooftop views. He didn't preach about flow or energy. He simply appreciated the world as it was. There was no rush, no intensity that burned too fast, just warmth, steadiness. And I realized how foreign that had felt with Christopher, how much I'd mistaken chaos for passion. Meanwhile, whispers of Christopher began drifting into my circle. A friend texted one evening, Joyce, did you hear Christopher's girlfriend left him? Another message came days later. His classes are thinning out. People say he's distracted, unfocused. I didn't reply to most of these. I wasn't interested in dissecting his downfall. But late at night, lying in bed, I couldn't help but think of the irony. He had thrown away stability for excitement only to watch it slip through his fingers. In therapy, I admitted the conflicting emotions. Part of me feels vindicated, I confessed. Like karma is balancing the scales. But part of me feels nothing, just detached. The therapist smiled gently. Detachment is growth, Joyce. You're moving on without letting bitterness poison you. She was right. For the first time, I felt like Christopher's choices weren't chains around my ankles anymore. They were just his chaos, his mess. One evening, after my photography class, Timothy walked me home. The city buzzed with Friday night energy streetlights, glowing, people laughing outside bars. We stopped at my building, neither of us quite ready to end the night. Joyce, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, would you want to grab dinner sometime? Just us. I felt my heart skip, but not in the panicked, high-stakes way it used to with Christopher. It was steadier, calmer. I smiled. I'd like that. When I went inside, the apartment still felt empty, but less hollow. The silence wasn't suffocating anymore. It was space. Space I could fill with something new, something mine. That night, I wrote a single line in my journal. Before bed, this isn't the end. It's the rebuild. And for the first time since Christopher left, I believed it. Dating Timothy didn't feel like falling. It felt like finding level ground after years of stumbling in the dark. Our first dinner together wasn't elaborate. A quiet Thai restaurant tucked between two laundromats, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and heavenly curry. But the conversation was effortless. He didn't fill silence with grand philosophies. He didn't try to impress me with charm. He asked questions and actually listened. When I joked about my disastrous attempt at baking sourdough, during lockdown, he laughed until tears slipped down his cheeks. I realized then how long it had been since I'd heard genuine laughter at my table. With Christopher, dinners were lectures. With Timothy, they were conversations. Weeks turned into months. Coffee dates became late-night walks. He'd send me photos of random street murals with captions like, "This one looks like it's winking at you." Sometimes he joined my photography class standing behind me as I framed a shot pointing out details I'd missed. With him, I felt seen. Not as someone's anchor, not as predictable Joyce, but as a woman with her own rhythm. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sunset, he said quietly, "You know what I like about you? You're steady. People underestimate that, but in a world this chaotic steadiness is rare." The words lodged in my chest, steady. Once Christopher had used it like an insult. Now Timothy spoke it like praise. I smiled, blinking back the sting of tears. Thank you. That means more than you know. But just as my life began piecing itself back together, the shadows of the past returned. It started small. A mutual friend casually mentioned over brunch, "Christopher's not doing great." I kept my face neutral, stirring my coffee. The friend went on his new girlfriend, she dumped him. Apparently, she said he was too flaky. Can you imagine? Flaky. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. Then came more whispers. His yoga classes had dwindled. Students complained he seemed distracted, unprepared. He'd canceled workshops last minute, leaving people stranded. Rumors floated that he was struggling financially, even couch surfing with friends. I listened quietly, nodding, but never asked for more. My silence was its own statement. I didn't care to know. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done throwing him back in my orbit. The first message came late one night, a number I didn't recognize. Hey, Joyce, it's me. Can we talk? I miss our chats. I stared at it, thumb hovering. Then I deleted it without replying. A week later, Joyce, please. I made a mistake. Let's meet for coffee. Again deleted. But the attempts didn't stop. Unknown numbers. Late night calls that went straight to voicemail. Sometimes I'd hear his voice crack through. I was confused. You were always steady. I see that now. It might have rattled me once, but by then my heart no longer recognized him as home. Timothy noticed, of course. One evening over dinner, my phone buzzed for the third time with a hidden number. I silenced it quickly, but he caught the flicker of tension on my face. You don't have to tell me, he said gently, but if you want to, I'll listen. I sighed, setting the fork down. It's Christopher. He won't stop trying to contact me. Timothy's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Do you want me to step in? I shook my head. No, this is my boundary to hold. He reached across this table, squeezing my hand. Then I trust you. But don't let him steal your peace again. I squeezed back. I won't. Still, the intrusions escalated. Christopher began showing up in places he knew I might be. Once he lingered outside my office building, waiting in the lobby. When reception buzzed me, I told them firmly to send him away. Then came the guilt tripping through others. His best friend Mia called voice sharp. Joyce, you're being childish. He's going through hell. Be the bigger person. I hung up. Later, his sister left me a voicemail dripping with accusation. You drove him away with your boring routine. Now he's suffering, and you won't even pick up. Pathetic. Deleted. Even his mother emailed guilt-laden Joyce family sticks together. He regrets it. Please come to dinner and talk. I replied once short, but clear. Respectfully, no. Please stop contacting me. That night, Timothy and I curled on the couch, sipping wine. I told him about the barrage of messages. He listened, then said simply, You're allowed to choose peace, Joyce. You don't owe anyone your pain just because they demand it. I leaned my head on his shoulder, a wave of gratitude washing over me. For once, I wasn't with someone who drained me. I was with someone who refilled me. Meanwhile, Christopher's desperation only confirmed the truth. I already knew he hadn't wanted me when I was his. He only wanted me once I was gone. One evening, while journaling, I wrote, He mistook my silence for weakness. He doesn't realize silence can be strength. And I meant it. Because every time Christopher tried to claw back into my life, I stayed still, steady, resolute. And every time Timothy's presence reminded me that love wasn't supposed to be chaos. It was supposed to feel like safety. But deep down, I knew something else. Christopher wasn't finished. His pride wouldn't let him fade quietly. The shadows were gathering, and sooner or later, he would try to drag them into my light. By the third month of ignoring Christopher's messages, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd finally given up. My phone had been silent for a week. No blocked numbers, no guilt-laden voicemails, no shadow lurking in the lobby at work. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's just the eye of the storm. It began again one Friday evening. Timothy and I had just come back from a movie, still laughing about the terrible plot twist when my phone lit up with another unknown number. Against my better judgment, I let it go to voicemail. Later, curiosity got the better of me, and I listened. Joyce, it's Christopher. Please. Just hear me out. I know I hurt you, but I was lost. I needed to find myself, and I see now what a mistake I made. You were always the one. I can't sleep. I can't focus. I need you. The desperation in his voice was thick, almost theatrical. For a moment, I closed my eyes and remembered the Christopher I once loved, vibrant, laughing, carefree. Then I remembered the Christopher at that restaurant whispering that I was embarrassing both of us. Delete. But he wasn't done. The next day, his best friend Mia texted me. You're being cruel. He's broken. Don't you even care? I set the phone down, pulse quickening. It wasn't enough for Christopher to invade my space. Now he was sending messengers. Later that week, I came home to find a letter slipped under my door. I recognized his handwriting, instantly slanted, careless. Joyce, I'm begging you. We had 4 years together. That means something. You can't just erase me. Let's start over. Please. My hand shook, but not with longing. with anger. He thought my silence meant indecision, not resolve. I tore the letter in half, tossed it in the bin, and changed the locks again, not because I thought he'd break in, but because I needed the ritual, a line drawn in steel and deadbolts. But the pressure mounted. His sister left another voicemail laced with venom. You think you're better than him now. You're cold, Joyce. Heartless. No wonder he looked for someone else. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity had reached a breaking point. Heartless. After everything I'd poured into him. After every rent check. Every sacrifice. The laugh turned sharp bitter. I wasn't heartless. I was done. One evening, Christopher himself showed up outside my building. I saw him from the window, first, slouched on the steps, hair unkempt, clutching a paper cup of coffee like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. My chest tightened, but I didn't move. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. His message, I'm outside. Please come down. Just 5 minutes. I typed back one word, no. A flurry of messages followed. Don't do this. You can't throw us away. You're with someone else already. After everything we had. You think he loves you like I did. I set the phone down, heart pounding, and walked away. I refused to let his spiral become my cage again. That night, Timothy found me curled on the couch, staring at the darkened window. You saw him, didn't you? He asked quietly. I nodded. Timothy sat beside me, not pressing, not lecturing, just presence. After a while, he said, You don't have to be afraid of him anymore. He can't take anything from you that you don't give. And he was right. The next morning, I blocked the new number, again. But Christopher's desperation only deepened. His mother emailed once more this time, tugging at every guilt string she could find. Joyce, he's sick with regret. He can't eat, can't work. Do you want that on your conscience? A good woman doesn't turn her back like this. I replied politely, firmly. With respect, I am no longer responsible for his choices. Please do not contact me again. Send. For days after, I felt the weight of their words pressing on my chest. Heartless, cruel, cold. But each time, Timothy's steady presence reminded me otherwise. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, he caught me zoning out, knife hovering above the cutting board. Joyce, he said gently, they're trying to rewrite the story. Don't let them. You know the truth. I exhaled, shakily nodding. I do. But it's exhausting carrying their noise. Then put it down, he said simply. You don't have to carry it. The simplicity of his words struck me. For years, I'd carried Christopher's burdens as if they were mine. His rent, his dreams, his doubts, even his betrayal I had twisted inward, wondering what I lacked. Not anymore. That night I wrote in my journal, I am not his savior. I am not his scapegoat. I am free. Still, a part of me knew Christopher wasn't finished. He was losing his grip, and people like him didn't fade quietly. His pride would demand one last act, one final spectacle. I didn't know when or how, but I felt it in my bones. The storm wasn't over. It was just circling closer. By the time Timothy proposed, I felt like my life had stitched itself back together in ways I hadn't thought possible. It wasn't extravagant. He planned a picnic at the park where we'd first kissed a simple spread of wine fruit and sandwiches. When he pulled out the emerald-cut ring, his hands trembling, I didn't feel dread. I didn't hear an inner voice saying, don't. I felt peace, certainty, a quiet joy so solid it made me laugh through my tears. Yes, I said before he could even finish asking. 1,000 times yes. The weeks that followed were a blur of planning laughter and messages from friends who said they'd never seen me this happy. We decided on a casual engagement celebration, not a grand affair, just a backyard barbecue at a mutual friend's place. String lights hung overhead, music hummed low, and people mingled with plates of food and glasses of wine. For the first time in years, I felt at home in my own life. And that's when Christopher showed up. I saw him slip through the side gate, clutching a half-empty wine glass like a shield. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled. He wore the strained smile of someone trying to blend in when they didn't belong. My stomach tightened, but I stayed composed. This was the moment I had been expecting, dreading, preparing for. The storm finally landing at my doorstep. He spotted me across the yard and made a beeline, weaving through guests. His eyes were wild, desperate, but also entitled, like he believed he still had a claim to me. Joyce, he said, voice shaky but urgent. We need to talk, now. I held my wine glass steady, refusing to flinch. This isn't the place, Christopher. Please, he pressed, lowering his voice, but still frantic. I saw the announcement online. Engaged. Already. After everything we had, you can't just replace me like that. The words hung in the air sharp enough that a few nearby guests turned to look. I caught Timothy's eyes across the yard. He started toward me, but I held up a subtle hand. I needed to face this myself. Christopher's face crumpled, panic flooding his expression. I was wrong, Joyce. Jake, she was nothing. Just a distraction. You were the one. You've always been the one. I'll change. Please give me another chance. Before I could answer, Timothy arrived at my side. He slipped his arm lightly around my waist, protective but not possessive. His presence alone steadied me. Christopher's eyes flicked to him, jealousy sparking like a live wire. So this is him, the guy you ran to. You think he knows you better than I do. 4 years, Joyce, you can't just erase that. I took a breath, then looked Christopher square in the eye. My voice was calm, but every syllable carried weight. You're right. I can't erase 4 years, but I can learn from them. And what I learned is this: we were never what I thought we were. He shook his head, face twisting. That's not true. You loved me. I did, I said evenly. And you threw it away. You told me I embarrassed you when all I wanted was to love you openly. You called me boring for being steady. And now that chaos has chewed you up and spit you out suddenly, my steadiness looks good to you again. His mouth opened closed. Guests were whispering now, the tension thick as humidity. I leaned in, my voice low but cutting. We're not that, Christopher. Not now, not ever. The difference is I finally believe it. Timothy squeezed my hand. Christopher's desperation cracked into anger. So what, you think he's better than me? You think this little fairy tale will last? You'll get bored, Joyce. You always played it safe. That's who you are. I felt a smile tug at my lips, not mocking, but certain. Yes, I play it safe. Safe enough to know that love shouldn't humiliate me. Safe enough to know stability is strength, not weakness. Safe enough to choose someone who actually wants me. Christopher flinched like I'd struck him. The words he once used to belittle me, I handed back to him like a mirror. Only now it was him, standing in the spotlight, exposed. This isn't about better, I added. This is about right. And you're not it. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, undeniable. Christopher's eyes glistened, his voice cracking. Joyce, please. Don't do this. I love you. I need you. I shook my head slowly. No, Christopher. You need someone to save you from yourself. But that's not my job anymore. For a heartbeat, he stood frozen, chest heaving. Then his face twisted, half pain, half rage. He slammed the empty wine glass on a nearby table, the crack making everyone jump. Timothy stepped forward, his tone firm but calm. I think it's time for you to leave. Christopher's gaze darted between us, his mouth opening like he had one last plea, then closing again when he saw I wasn't moved. Not this time, not ever again. He turned, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out the way he'd come. The gate creaked shut behind him, leaving a vacuum of silence in his wake. For a moment, no one moved. Then the music swelled back, conversations resumed, and the party breathed again. Timothy turned to me, eyes searching. You okay? I nodded, truly nodded. I am now. Because in that moment, standing in the glow of string lights with Timothy's hand steady in mine, I realized Christopher no longer had power over me. He was just noise, a faded echo. And I was done listening. In the days after the engagement party, I expected to feel unsettled. After all, Christopher had barged into my life one last time, dragging chaos behind him like a storm cloud. But instead of lingering dread, I felt something else. Relief. For years, Christopher's presence had loomed over me like a shadow. Even after he left, even after I began to rebuild, he lingered in the corners, a ghost haunting the quiet. But that night, in front of everyone, he revealed himself for what he truly was: desperate, unstable, and incapable of change. And I stood my ground. I didn't crumble. I didn't beg. I didn't absorb his pain as if it were my duty. For the first time, I was free. Life moved forward quickly after that. Timothy and I dove into wedding plans, not the kind that demanded perfection, but the kind that felt like fun. Food tastings, playlists, silly debates about centerpieces. My parents adored him. My friends said I glowed when I talked about him. At work, my career kept flourishing. I pitched a major campaign that landed us a high-profile client. My boss congratulated me, saying, Joyce, you've become the backbone of this team. The word that once felt like an insult, backbone, steady, predictable, now felt like a crown I wore proudly. Meanwhile, whispers about Christopher still drifted into my circle, though I didn't ask for them. He'd been dropped by the studio where he taught. He bounced between odd jobs, Friends who once cheered for his spontaneity now avoided his calls. The new woman who had understood his energy had long since disappeared. Once I might have taken satisfaction in that karma served cold. But the truth was, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity either. I felt nothing. He wasn't part of my story anymore. And that was the sweetest justice of all. One evening, Timothy and I sat on the balcony of our apartment, the city skyline glowing against the night. He leaned back in his chair, wineglass in hand, and asked, "Do you ever think about him?" I considered the question honestly, not the way I used to. Sometimes he flickers through my mind like a memory of an old injury, but it doesn't hurt anymore. It's just a scar. Timothy nodded his thumb, brushing my hand. Scars mean healing. I smiled, pressing my head against his shoulder. Exactly. There were still moments, of course, when ghosts of the past tried to whisper. Passing the Italian restaurant where I'd once planned to propose made my stomach tighten. Seeing yoga mats stacked in store windows sometimes pulled me back to nights waiting for Christopher to come home. But those memories no longer defined me. They were lessons, not chains. Lesson 1. Love is not sacrifice without return. Lesson 2. Steadiness is not boring. It's strength. Lesson 3. Never let someone convince you that your worth is smaller than their chaos. The night Timothy proposed had rewritten the story of proposals for me. Where Christopher had once made me feel humiliated, Timothy had made me feel cherished. Where Christopher saw me as an anchor weighing him down, Timothy saw me as the foundation he wanted to build on. That difference was everything. As the months passed, Timothy and I took a short trip up the coast. One morning, standing barefoot on a cliff overlooking the ocean, I turned to him and said, "Do you know what the best part of all this is?" He squinted against the sunlight, smiling. "The view." I laughed. "The fact that I can stand here and not feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. With you, there's no game, no performance. Just us." He wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me close. "That's all I ever want." We stayed there in silence, waves crashing below the wind, tugging at our clothes. And in that moment, I realized that the emptiness I had once feared after Christopher left had been necessary. It had carved out space inside me, space that could finally be filled with something real. On the flight home, I opened my journal one last time. I flipped through pages filled with anger, sorrow, and confusion. Then, on the final page, I wrote, "I am not defined by who left me. I am defined by what I built after." And I built something beautiful. When I closed the book, I felt a quiet certainty that the chapter was truly done. Christopher was no longer a haunting, he was a lesson. And lessons don't linger forever, they guide you forward. Weeks later, at a small cafe, a mutual friend leaned across the table and whispered, "I saw Christopher the other day. He looked rough. He asked about you." I stirred my coffee unbothered. "What did you tell him?" She smiled knowingly. "That you're happier than I've ever seen you." I smiled back. Good answer. Because I was. When the wedding day finally arrived, I stood at the edge of the aisle dress, flowing heart steady. My father squeezed my hand, whispering, "You look radiant, Joyce." As I stepped forward toward Timothy, I thought back briefly to the girl who once sat in a dim Italian restaurant ring box, burning in her pocket, heart collapsing under a whispered insult. And then I thought of the woman I had become, standing tall, steady, ready to step into a future built not on sand, but on rock. When Timothy's eyes met mine at the altar, there was no panic, no dread, only love, only certainty. And as I placed my hand in his, I knew the truth with every fiber of my being. I hadn't just survived Christopher's betrayal, I had outgrown it. This wasn't revenge, this wasn't triumph. This was freedom.